The GPS died somewhere between Barstow and nowhere, leaving me with handwritten directions on a gas receipt and the growing certainty that I'd made a terrible mistake. The desert stretched endlessly in every direction, broken only by the occasional Joshua tree standing like a scarecrow against the star-drunk sky. My Honda's engine wheezed with each mile, reminding me why I needed this job in the first place. Mom's chemo bills sat folded in my wallet, $3,147 due by Friday. The temp agency had called this morning with something that paid double the usual rate, night shift at a remote gas station. Isolated location, the woman had said, like that was supposed to be a selling point. Perfect for someone who needs to focus. My phone buzzed again. David, third time in an hour. I let it go to voicemail. The station appeared suddenly, a bright island in the darkness that made me squint after hours of highway hypnosis. 2 pumps, a small building with large windows, and a neon sign that flickered between open and something I couldn't quite read. I pulled up to the front door and killed the engine. Inside, fluorescent lights hummed over aisles of snacks and motor oil. Behind the counter stood a thin man in his 50s, pale skin stretched tight over sharp bones. His dark hair was slicked back, and when he smiled, his teeth looked too white. Marcus Chen? His voice carried a slight accent I couldn't place. That's me. Excellent timing. I'm Mr. Holloway, the manager. He extended his hand. His fingernails were yellowed and slightly too long, like he'd forgotten to trim them for months. Ready to get started? I shook his hand, noting how cold his skin felt despite the desert heat. The agency said you needed someone tonight? Indeed. My previous employee had to leave rather suddenly. He reached under the counter and produced a manila folder. Standard employment paperwork. Nothing complicated. The contract was surprisingly short. 2 pages of basic employment terms and a section titled Station-Specific Guidelines. I skimmed through salary information that matched what the agency had promised, then focused on the guidelines. 3 main rules, Mr. Holloway said, watching me read. First, never leave the register unattended between 2 and 4 a.m. That's our busiest period for unusual customers. I looked up. Unusual how? Desert travelers. People who've been driving too long, seeing things that aren't there. Best to stay visible and available. His smile never wavered. Second rule, never acknowledge sounds from the back office during those same hours. The building settles, pipes make noise. Investigating will only distract you from customer service. Okay, I kept reading. The third rule was highlighted in yellow. Always fill customer vehicles to exactly 50% capacity, regardless of payment amount or customer requests. That last one seems odd, I said. Insurance requirements. Something about liability and fuel expansion in desert heat. Mr. Holloway tapped the signature line with one yellowed nail. The pen's right there. I picked up what looked like an expensive fountain pen, heavy and warm to the touch. The moment I pressed it to paper, pain shot through my finger. I jerked my hand back, watching a drop of blood well up from a small cut. Paper cut, Mr. Holloway said smoothly. Desert air makes everything sharp. The pen had left a dark red signature across the line. I sucked on my finger, tasting copper while Mr. Holloway collected the papers with obvious satisfaction. Welcome to the team, Marcus. Your shift starts now and ends at 6 a.m. He handed me a name tag and a ring of keys. I'll be back tomorrow evening to check on you. Any questions? What about training? Register system, procedures? You'll figure it out. The station chooses its employees carefully. He headed for the door, then paused. Oh, and Marcus, the rules aren't suggestions. Follow them exactly. The door chimed as he left, and I was alone. The register system was straightforward enough, basic point of sale with credit card processing. I found the employee handbook under the counter, a thin booklet with Desert Star Station printed on the cover. Inside were the same 3 rules Mr. Holloway had mentioned, plus standard policies about theft, tardiness, and customer service. The first few hours passed normally. A trucker bought coffee and complained about road construction. A family in an SUV needed directions to Phoenix. A woman with California plates filled up her sedan while her kids slept in the back seat. Each transaction followed the same pattern. They'd ask for a full tank. I'd stop the pump at 50%. They'd look confused but pay anyway. Around 11:30, the flow of customers slowed to nothing. I restocked the coffee station and wiped down the counters, trying not to think about the silence pressing against the windows. The desert at night felt alive in a way that made my skin crawl. At midnight exactly, the door chimed. She wore a faded blue dress that might have been fashionable decades ago, the fabric worn thin and colorless. Her dark hair hung loose around her shoulders, and her skin had a pale, translucent quality that made her seem insubstantial. She moved through the aisles slowly, her eyes scanning the shelves like she was looking for something specific. "Can I help you find anything?" I called out. She turned toward me, and I saw her face clearly for the first time. She was young, maybe mid-20s, but her eyes held a sadness so deep it made my chest ache. When she spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "Have you seen my baby?" The question hit me like a physical blow. For a moment, I was 7 years old again, standing in Emma's nursery while Mom screamed and Dad called 911. The memory of my sister's still form in her crib, the way her skin had felt cold and waxy when I'd touched her tiny hand. I gripped the counter's edge. "We don't sell baby supplies here. Just snacks and automotive stuff." Her face crumpled like I'd struck her. "But he was here. I heard him crying." "I'm sorry. I haven't seen any babies tonight." She stared at me for a long moment, tears sliding down her cheeks. Then she began walking backward toward the door, never taking her eyes off me. The automatic door opened and she stepped through it, still facing me, her mouth moving in words I couldn't hear. The door closed, and she was gone. I stood there shaking, my heart hammering against my ribs. The woman's grief had felt real, overwhelming, but something about the encounter was wrong. The way she'd moved, the way she'd looked at me like I was supposed to know something I didn't. I checked my phone. 12:17 a.m. Still hours to go. The next customer was a man in his 40s driving a pickup truck. He bought a pack of cigarettes and an energy drink, paid cash, and left without saying much. Normal. Human. I started to relax. At 1:30, a sedan pulled up to pump 2. The driver, a middle-aged woman, came inside to prepay for gas. She handed me $40 and asked for pump 2. "I'll fill it up," she said. "I can only fill it halfway," I replied, remembering the rule. She frowned. "Why?" "I'm paying for a full tank." "Store policy. Insurance requirements." "That's ridiculous. I need a full tank to get to Flagstaff." I shrugged apologetically and authorized $20 to the pump. She stormed out, muttering about incompetent employees. Through the window, I watched her fill up exactly halfway before the pump automatically shut off. She tried the handle again, but nothing happened. After a moment of frustrated gesturing, she got back in her car and drove away. The rules worked, apparently, even when I didn't understand why. At 2:15 a.m., I was reorganizing the candy display when I heard it. Crying. Soft, muffled, but unmistakably the sound of an infant in distress. It was coming from the back office. I froze, a bag of gummy bears halfway to the shelf. The crying continued, rising and falling in the rhythm I remembered too well from Emma's last night. The sound that had woken me up, that had sent me padding down the hallway in my pajamas to check on her. Rule 2. Never acknowledge sounds from the back office. But it was a baby. What if someone had left a child back there? What if it was hurt, or sick, or... The crying grew louder, more urgent. Every instinct I had screamed at me to investigate, to help. I took a step toward the back of the store, then I stopped. Mr. Holloway's words echoed in my mind. The rules aren't suggestions. Follow them exactly. I forced myself to return to the candy display, my hands shaking as I arranged packages of M&Ms. The crying continued for another 10 minutes, sometimes fading to barely audible whimpers, sometimes rising to heartbreaking wails that made my eyes water. At exactly 3 a.m., it stopped. The silence that followed was somehow worse than the crying. I stood behind the register, gripping the counter so hard my knuckles had gone white, and tried to convince myself I'd done the right thing. The security monitor caught my attention. 4 small screens showed different angles of the station: the front entrance, the pump area, the aisles, and the back office. The back office camera showed a closed door, just as it should be. But as I watched, the door seemed to shift slightly, opening just a crack. I blinked and looked again. The door was closed. But in the thin strip of darkness at the bottom of the screen, something small moved. A shadow, maybe, or a trick of the light. It was there for just a moment before disappearing. I stared at the monitor until my eyes burned, but the movement didn't repeat. The back office remained still and dark, the door firmly closed. My phone showed 3:23 a.m., less than 3 hours to go. I tried to focus on normal tasks, restocking, cleaning, anything to keep my mind occupied, but the woman's question kept echoing in my head. Have you seen my baby? And underneath that, a worse thought. What if the crying had been real? What if there really was a child back there, and I'd ignored it because of some arbitrary rule? But Mr. Holloway had been specific, never acknowledged sounds from the back office. He'd known this would happen. The door chimed again, and I looked up to see another customer entering. This one was different, older, with graying hair and burned scars covering half his face. He moved with the careful gait of someone who'd learned to live with chronic pain. "Evening," he said, approaching the counter. "Good evening. Can I help you?" He studied me for a moment, his eyes sharp and knowing. "First night?" "Yeah, how'd you know?" "You've got that look. Like you're trying to figure out if you're going crazy or if the world is." He leaned against the counter. "Name's Sam Morrison. I drive through here regular. Marcus Chen." "Marcus." He nodded slowly. "How many rules did they give you?" "3. Why?" Sam's scarred face twisted into something that might have been a smile. "They always start with 3. Makes it seem manageable." He pulled out a worn wallet and extracted a $20 bill. "Pack of Marlboro Reds and whatever gas this'll buy." I rang up the cigarettes and authorized the remaining amount to pump 1. Sam didn't move to leave. "You heard the crying," he said. It wasn't a question. I hesitated. "I don't know what you mean." "Sure you do. Around 2:47, lasted about 13 minutes. Stopped right at 3. Sam's eyes never left my face. "You followed the rule. Good. That's how you survived the first night." "Survive? This place?" Sam gestured vaguely at the store around us. "It's not what it seems. The rules aren't about insurance or customer service. They're about keeping you alive long enough to understand what you've gotten yourself into." A chill ran down my spine. "What are you talking about? You signed the contract with blood, didn't you? Thought it was a paper cut?" I touched my finger unconsciously. The small wound had already healed, leaving no trace. "How did you?" "Because that's how it always starts. The station chooses its employees, Marcus. And once you've signed..." He shrugged. "Well, let's just say the job description isn't complete." Before I could respond, Sam headed for the door. He paused with his hand on the handle. "Advice? Follow the rules exactly. Don't try to be a hero, and whatever you do, don't go looking for answers you're not ready to handle." He pushed the door open. "See you around, Marcus, one way or another." The door chimed as he left, and I was alone again. I stared at the security monitor, watching Sam pump his gas. He filled up exactly halfway, just like everyone else, then got back in his truck and drove away. but something about his words had shaken me more than the crying or the strange woman. The station chooses its employees. I pulled out my phone and scrolled to David's missed calls. 3 voicemails, all from earlier tonight. I played the first one. "Marcus, don't take that job. I looked into the company. Desert Star Station. There's something wrong with their employment records. People start working there and then just disappear from the system. No forwarding addresses, no references, nothing. Call me back." The second message was more urgent. "Seriously, man, I found a forum where people talk about these stations. They're all over the Southwest, same company, same weird stories. Don't sign anything until we talk." The third message was barely audible, like David was whispering, "If you're already there, follow whatever rules they gave you. Don't try to leave until sunrise. And Marcus, don't trust anyone who says they're trying to help you." I lowered the phone, my hands trembling. The contract was already signed. The job had already started, and according to the clock on the register, I still had 2.5 hours until dawn. Outside, the desert stretched endlessly in all directions, dark and empty except for the small circle of light around the station. I was trapped here until morning, bound by rules I didn't understand, in a place that apparently chose its employees for reasons that had nothing to do with customer service. The security monitor flickered, and for just a moment I thought I saw movement in the back office again. But when I looked directly at the screen, everything was still. I gripped the counter and tried to steady my breathing. Whatever was happening here, whatever I'd gotten myself into, I had to survive until sunrise. Follow the rules. Don't investigate. Don't try to be a hero. But as I stood there in the fluorescent light, surrounded by the vast darkness of the desert, I couldn't shake the feeling that the real test was just beginning. I stared at the computer screen, the employee training folder glowing like a beacon in the digital darkness. After Sam's cryptic warnings, I needed answers that made sense, real answers, not riddles about stations choosing employees. The desktop was sparse, just a few folders labeled Inventory, Schedules, and Employee Records, Do Not Delete. That last one practically screamed at me to click it. Inside were dozens of video files organized by year going back to 1987. Each file was labeled with an employee name and date range. I scrolled through them. Rodriguez, Miguel, 1989, 1990. Thompson, Sarah, 1995, 1996. Vasquez, Eddie, 1987 and 1988. Eddie Vasquez. I clicked on his file. The security footage was grainy, black and white, but clear enough. A young man with dark hair stood behind the same register where I was sitting now. The timestamp read 3:17 a.m., October 15th, 1987. Eddie was maybe 22, wearing a uniform shirt that looked identical to mine except for the faded logo. In the video, Eddie suddenly looked up, tilting his head like he was listening to something. His mouth moved. He was talking to someone off camera. Then he stepped away from the register, moving toward the back of the store. The camera angle switched, following him down the same aisle I'd walked earlier. Eddie approached the back office door, his hand reaching for the handle. He paused, looking over his shoulder, then opened the door and disappeared inside. For 20 minutes, the feed showed an empty store, just the register area, fluorescent lights humming silently in the recording. Then Eddie returned to frame, but something was wrong. Eddie walked normally, moved normally, but his shadow stretched across the floor in the wrong direction. While Eddie stood directly under the lights, his shadow fell toward the camera, dark and sharp against the linoleum. As I watched, the shadow moved independently, reaching toward the lens while Eddie remained perfectly still. The video ended abruptly. I sat back, my heart hammering. The timestamp showed Eddie had worked here for 8 months. What had happened to him after that night? I checked the current security monitors. 4 feeds showing the station from different angles. Front door, pump area, aisles, back office. Everything looked normal until I focused on pump 3. A shadow moved between the gas pumps, not cast by any person or object I could see, but definitely there. It stretched and contracted like it was searching, reaching toward the building, then pulling back. The shadow of a person who wasn't there. Jesus, I whispered. The front door chimed. Sam Morrison walked in, his scarred face grim in the fluorescent light. He moved straight to the counter without browsing, his eyes fixed on me. "How many rules did they give you?" he asked. "3. You asked me that earlier." That was earlier. Things change fast here. Sam leaned against the counter. "Check your handbook." I pulled out the thin booklet from under the register. The cover still read, Desert Star Station Employee Guidelines. But when I opened it, my blood went cold. The pages had multiplied. What had been a simple 3-rule pamphlet now contained 13 numbered guidelines, each written in different handwriting. Some looked typed, others handwritten in various inks. Rule 7, written in blue ballpoint pen, read, "Never acknowledge temporal inconsistencies." The handwriting looked familiar, too familiar. "That's impossible," I said. This was 3 pages when I started. "Rule 7, Sam said quietly. "You just broke it." I stared at the handbook, flipping through pages that shouldn't exist. Rule 9 was written in red ink. "Sam Morrison must warn but cannot save." Rule 11, in pencil. "Employee shadows belong to the station after first violation." "Sam," I said slowly, "what happened to Eddie Vasquez?" Sam rolled up his left sleeve, revealing a tattoo on his forearm. Not a normal tattoo. The words looked burned into his skin, raised and angry. "Sam Morrison must warn but cannot save." "I tried to help him," Sam said. October 15th, 1987. Eddie was a good kid, reminded me of my younger brother. When he started hearing the crying, I radioed him from my truck, told him to stay at the register. But he went back there anyway. "You were here that night?" "I've been here every night since 1979. Different truck, same route, same warning I give to every new employee." Sam's scarred face twisted. "The station made me part of its system. I warn people, but the warnings are designed to fail. Fear makes the binding stronger." I looked at the security monitor showing pump 3. The shadow was still there, moving restlessly between the pumps. "Is that Eddie?" "Part of him. The part that tried to help someone else's baby instead of following the rules." Sam pointed at the monitor. "Your shadow's already starting to separate. Look." I glanced at the monitor showing the register area. There I was, standing behind the counter, but something was off about my reflection in the screen. The image lagged slightly, like a bad video call. When I raised my hand, my reflection followed a split second later. "It starts small," Sam said. "Temporal displacement. Your reflection running behind your movements. Then your shadow starts acting independently. Eventually, if you break enough rules, you become part of the station's warning system like me." The woman in blue appeared on every monitor simultaneously. In the front door camera, she stood just outside the entrance. In the pump area feed, she was between the gas pumps. In the aisle camera, she moved slowly down the snack aisle. In the back office monitor, she sat in a chair that hadn't been there before. But in each feed, she was doing something different. Outside, she was looking up at the sky. At the pumps, she was kneeling on the ground. In the aisle, she was reaching toward the camera. In the back office, she was holding something wrapped in a blanket. The bundle in her arms moved. "Mary Hutchinson," Sam said, following my gaze. "Lost her baby here in 1892. Made a deal to search for him forever. Every employee becomes part of her search." "That's insane." "Is it? You signed a contract with your blood. You're following rules that change themselves. You're watching security footage of a man whose shadow moves independently." Sam's voice was matter-of-fact. "What part of this seems sane to you?" I looked back at the monitor showing the back office. The woman, Mary, was rocking the bundle gently. As I watched, she looked directly into the camera and mouthed a single word. "Help." She wants me to go back there. She wants you to find her baby. That's what every employee thinks they're doing when they break Rule 2. But the baby isn't lost, Marcus. The baby is the station. The crying, the searching, the endless need. That's what powers this place. I checked my reflection in the monitor again. The lag was getting worse. When I moved my head, my image took nearly a full second to follow. How do I stop it? Sam was quiet for a long moment. You don't. You survive until dawn, then you leave and never come back. That's the only way. What about the next person? What about Jennifer? Jennifer? I hadn't mentioned that name to Sam. I'd never heard that name before tonight, but somehow I knew it, like it had been written in my mind the moment I signed the contract. Sam's scarred face went pale. You're already seeing the next employee. That means your binding is accelerating. On the monitor, Mary stood up from the chair in the back office. She was walking toward the camera, the bundle still in her arms. As she got closer, I could see that the blanket was moving more frantically, like whatever was inside was struggling. Don't look, Sam said urgently. Don't try to see what she's carrying. But I couldn't look away. Mary filled the monitor now, her face inches from the camera lens. Her eyes were black holes, and when she opened her mouth, sand poured out instead of words. She held up the bundle, unwrapping it slowly. Inside was a mirror. In the mirror's reflection, I saw myself as an infant, then as an old man, then as nothing at all. The images cycled endlessly: birth, age, death, birth again, and underneath it all, the sound of crying that seemed to come from inside my own chest. Marcus. Sam's voice sounded far away. Look at your hands. I looked down. My hands were translucent like Mary's had been. I could see the counter through my palms, see the register keys through my fingers. The transformation is starting, Sam said. You need to make a choice. Follow the rules and survive until dawn, or break them and become part of the station forever. The crying from the back office started again, but this time, it wasn't coming through the walls. It was coming from the monitor speakers, from the fluorescent lights, from inside my own head, and underneath the infant's wails, I heard another sound, my own voice, calling for help from somewhere very far away. The red pickup pulled up to pump 3 at exactly 3:47 a.m., its engine rumbling like a diesel even though it was clearly a gas truck. The driver climbed out slowly, moving with the stiff gait of someone whose joints had given up on flexibility decades ago. He wore a faded flannel shirt and jeans that had seen better years, maybe better decades. I watched him through the window as he approached the pump. Something about his movements seemed rehearsed, like he'd done this exact routine countless times before. He inserted the nozzle with practiced efficiency and headed for the door. The bell chimed as he entered, and I got my first clear look at his face. Weathered skin, deep lines around pale blue eyes, and a gray beard that needed trimming. But it was his expression that caught my attention. The look of someone who expected things to go a certain way and had never been disappointed. "Evening," he said, approaching the counter. His voice carried the rough edge of a long-time smoker. "Good evening. How can I help you?" "Same as always. Pump 3, fill her up." He pulled out a worn leather wallet and extracted 2 20s. "Been coming here every Tuesday for 37 years. Never had a problem." I stared at him. 37 years would put his first visit sometime in the mid-'80s. Before Eddie Vasquez. Before most of the employee records I'd seen. "I can only authorize half a tank," I said, remembering Rule 4. "Store policy." His face darkened. "What kind of policy is that? I'm paying for a full tank." "Insurance requirements. I'm sorry, but..." "Insurance?" He slammed his fist on the counter, making the register jump. "Boy, I've been filling up here since before you were born. I know every manager this place has had, every rule they've tried to implement. There ain't no insurance policy that stops a man from buying gas." I authorized $20 to pump 3. keeping my voice steady. "That's all I can do." He leaned across the counter, his pale eyes boring into mine. "You'll learn, just like all the others. This place has its own way of teaching lessons." He straightened up and headed for the door. 37 years, and I ain't never left here with half a tank. Tonight won't be the first time. The door chimed as he left. Through the window, I watched him return to his truck and grab the pump handle. The display showed $20 authorized, but as he squeezed the trigger, the numbers kept climbing. 25, 30, 40. The pump didn't stop at 50%. It kept going until the tank was full. He hung up the nozzle, tipped his hat toward the window, and drove away. I stared at the pump display. It still showed the full amount he'd dispensed, but my register only recorded the $20 I'd authorized. The system had let him break the rule, like it recognized his claim about 37 years of service. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Check the archives. Mary Hutchinson, 1892. I looked around the empty store. No one else was here. No one else had my number except David, and this wasn't his phone. I pulled up the browser on my phone and searched for Mary Hutchinson, 1892. The first result was a digitized newspaper article from the Barstow Desert Dispatch, dated October 23, 1892. Local woman's child vanishes during desert crossing. The article was brief, written in the formal style of 19th century journalism. Mary Hutchinson, age 28, traveling west with her husband and infant son, had stopped at a way station to water their horses. When they prepared to continue their journey, the child was nowhere to be found. Despite extensive searching by local authorities and volunteer parties, no trace of the infant was discovered. What made my blood run cold was the accompanying photograph. Even in the grainy black and white of a century-old newspaper, I recognized her face. The same woman who'd asked about her baby. The same translucent skin. The same deep sadness in her eyes. The caption read, "Mrs. Mary Hutchinson at the site where her son disappeared." Behind her in the photograph stood a small building with 2 water pumps for horses. The structure was different, older, but it occupied the exact same location as the current gas station. My phone rang. Mr. Holloway's name appeared on the screen. "Marcus," his voice was calm, almost pleased. "How are you managing your first night?" "Fine," I lied. "Everything's under control." "Excellent. I wanted to let you know that you're approaching the most important part of your shift. Every employee faces a moment of understanding, usually around 4 a.m. This is your test, Marcus. Handle it alone." "What kind of test?" "You'll know when it happens. Remember the rules, but more importantly, remember why you're there." The line crackled with static. "The station chose you for a reason." "Mr. Holloway, I need to ask you about..." The line went dead. Not a normal disconnect, but a sound like sand pouring through the speaker, filling the silence with a soft, persistent hiss. I tried calling back. The number went straight to a recording. "The number you have dialed is not in service." The lights flickered. For a moment, the fluorescent bulbs dimmed to almost nothing, casting the store in deep shadows. In that brief darkness, I saw movement in the back office, not on the security monitor, through the actual doorway at the end of the aisle. The lights came back up, but something had changed. The air felt thicker, like the pressure had dropped, and from the back office came a sound I'd been dreading. Not crying this time, whispering. Multiple voices, all speaking at once. Too quiet to make out individual words, but loud enough to know they were there. The sound rose and fell like a conversation, like several people discussing something urgent in hushed tones. Rule 2, never acknowledge sounds from the back office. But these weren't random noises or buildings settling. These were human voices, and they were calling my name. "Marcus," clear as day, spoken by someone who sounded exactly like me. I gripped the counter. The security monitor showed the back office door standing open, though I was certain it had been closed moments before. The camera angle revealed part of the room beyond, a desk, a filing cabinet, and something else. Shapes that looked like people. "Marcus, come here." My own voice again, but coming from the back office. I looked at my reflection in the monitor. The lag was getting worse, nearly 2 full seconds now between my movements and my image. But worse than that, my reflection was moving its mouth when I wasn't speaking. My reflection was the one calling my name. The whispering grew louder, more urgent. I could make out individual words now. "Help us. Don't leave. You're already here." All in my voice, all spoken by people I couldn't see. I stood up from the stool behind the register. Every instinct screamed at me to stay put, to follow Rule 2, to wait for dawn. But the voices were so familiar, so desperate. And underneath them, barely audible, was the sound of that infant crying again. I walked toward the back of the store. The aisle seemed longer than before, stretching away from me like I was walking through a funhouse mirror. The fluorescent lights flickered with each step, casting my shadow in multiple directions. But as I got closer to the back office, I realized I wasn't casting just one shadow anymore. There were 5 of them, all slightly different heights, all moving independently. I reached the doorway and looked inside. 5 versions of myself sat around a small table in the back office. Each one was in a different state of decay. The one closest to the door looked almost normal, maybe a few days dead. His skin was pale but intact, his clothes the same uniform I was wearing. But his eyes were solid black, and when he saw me, he smiled with teeth that were too sharp. The second version was missing patches of skin, revealing gray muscle underneath. His uniform was stained with something dark that might have been blood or might have been oil. The third had no face at all, just smooth skin where his features should be, though somehow he was still speaking. "You're already here," he said in my voice, the words coming from somewhere inside his throat. The fourth was barely recognizable as human. His shadow had been peeled away like eddies, leaving him translucent and flickering. He reached toward me with fingers that bent in too many directions. The fifth was nothing but bones in a uniform, held together by will or magic, or something worse. When he spoke, sand poured from his mouth instead of words. "Welcome to the team," the freshest version said. "We've been waiting for you to join us." I tried to step backward, but my feet wouldn't move. The faceless version stood up from the table, his movements smooth and wrong. As he approached, I felt my own face going numb, like Novocaine spreading across my skin. "Don't fight it," he said. "Fighting just makes it take longer." His hand reached toward my face, fingers that felt like ice and static. When they were inches from my skin, I felt my reflection in the dark window behind him beginning to blur. I jerked backward, breaking whatever hold had kept me frozen. The numbness in my face receded, but I could still feel where his fingers had almost touched me, cold spots that burned like frostbite. I ran. Behind me, all 5 versions of myself laughed in perfect unison, the sound echoing through the store like a chorus of the damned. I made it back to the register just as sand began pouring through the sealed windows. Not from outside. The desert beyond the glass was still and quiet. The sand was coming from inside the building itself, streaming through cracks that shouldn't exist, filling the air with grit that tasted like copper and decay. The woman in blue materialized behind the counter next to me. "He's crying again," she said, holding her bundle close. "He's been crying for so long." The sound was coming from everywhere now, not just the back office, but from inside the walls themselves, from the ceiling tiles, from the floor, from the very structure of the building. The cry of an infant who had been lost for over a century, who would never stop searching for comfort that would never come. All the gas pumps outside turned on at once. Through the window, I watched fuel spray from every nozzle, but it wasn't gasoline. The liquid was dark red and smelled like copper when the wind carried it through the door. The pump displays showed numbers, but not gallons or dollars. Dates. 1995, 2003, 2017, 2024, 2031, all different years, all in the future, all showing the different times I would die. The sand was ankle deep now, rising steadily. Mary Hutchinson looked at me with her black hole eyes and unwrapped her bundle. Inside was a mirror, just like in the security footage. But this time, when I looked into it, I saw something different. I saw myself at age 7, standing in Emma's nursery. I saw myself signing the contract with blood. I saw myself in the back office with the other versions, all of us trapped in an endless cycle of death and rebirth. And I saw myself 30 years from now, standing behind this same register, warning a young man who looked exactly like me about rules he would never be able to follow. The mirror showed me the truth. I had never left this place. I had been here all along, in every moment, in every timeline, dying and returning and dying again. The station didn't choose its employees. It created them. I stared at the sedan through the window as it pulled up to Pump 2, its headlights cutting through the pre-dawn darkness. The car looked normal enough, a silver Honda Accord, maybe 10 years old, with a few dents that spoke of highway miles and parking lot mishaps. But something about the way it moved felt wrong, like it was gliding rather than driving. The family that climbed out made my stomach drop. There were 3 of them, 2 adults and a child who couldn't have been older than 8. They moved with the careful coordination of people who'd done this before, the parents flanking the kid as they approached the building. But where their faces should have been, there was only smooth skin. No eyes, no nose, no mouth, just blank expanses of flesh that somehow still managed to convey expression through subtle shifts and tilts. The child was different. They had a mouth, a perfect, normal mouth, that moved as they spoke, even though the rest of their face was as featureless as their parents. "Please," the child said, pressing their small hands against the glass door. Their voice was clear, articulate, completely at odds with their appearance. We remember being normal. We had faces before we broke Rule 11 at the Tucson station. I stayed behind the register, my hands gripping the counter. The family stood outside, not trying to enter, just waiting. The parents' heads turned toward me in unison, and somehow I knew they were looking at me despite having no eyes. "Rule 11, the child continued, their breath fogging the glass. "Never trust your own reflection after midnight." We thought it was stupid. We looked in the bathroom mirror and laughed about it. Their voice cracked. The next morning we woke up like this. The woman in blue materialized beside me so suddenly I jumped. She was holding her bundle again, rocking it gently as she watched the family outside. "They're from the network," she said softly. "Every station is connected. When one employee fails, they become fuel for the system. These 3 have been driving from station to station for 2 years, trying to find someone who will break the rules and free them all." "That's insane," I whispered. "Is it?" She looked at me with those black hole eyes. "You've been holding my baby since you signed the contract, Marcus. Every employee becomes the child's caretaker through the blood signature. The crying you hear, that's your own future voice calling back through time." I wanted to argue, to deny it, but the crying from the back office had never stopped. And now that she mentioned it, the voice did sound familiar. Too familiar. The child outside pressed harder against the glass. "Please, we know you can hear us. We know you understand. Just break one rule. Any rule. Set us free." Their parents nodded in silent agreement, their smooth faces somehow conveying desperate hope. I thought about my father, about how he'd left when I was 7, claiming he had to do something important, something noble. How he'd promised to come back and never did. How my mother had cried for months, waiting for a man who'd abandoned his family for whatever cause he thought was more important than us. "No," I said, loud enough for them to hear through the glass. I'm not breaking any rules. The child's face crumpled. But we're suffering. We've been suffering for 2 years. And I'm sorry about that. But I'm not making the same mistake my father made. I turned away from the window. I'm not abandoning my responsibilities for someone else's noble cause. When I looked back, the family was gone. The sedan sat empty at pump 2, its engine still running, but no one was inside. The woman in blue was studying me with something that might have been approval. "You're learning," she said, "but you still don't understand what you're really holding." She unwrapped her bundle slowly, revealing the mirror I'd seen before. But this time, when I looked into it, the reflection was different. I saw myself as an infant, tiny and helpless. Then, aging rapidly through childhood, adolescence, adulthood, old age, death, and back to infancy again. The cycle repeated endlessly, each lifetime compressed into seconds. "Time folds here," she explained. "Every employee exists at every moment at once. Past, present, future, they're all the same thing. You're not just working tonight, Marcus. You're working every night that ever was or ever will be." I pulled out my phone and called Sam's number. He answered on the first ring. "You need to see something," I said. "I'm already here." I looked up. Sam stood outside the front door, his scarred face grim in the fluorescent light. He wasn't trying to enter, just standing there like he was waiting for permission. "Come in," I called. He shook his head. "Can't, not anymore. But I can talk through the glass." I walked to the door, staying on my side of the threshold. "Sam, I found your personnel file. It shows employment dates from 1952 through 2024. Same photo for 72 years. Sam's expression didn't change. "Time works different when you're bound to the system. I traded linear existence for eternal service. Every night I warn new employees. Every night they make the same choices. Every night the station gets stronger. Your warnings help it claim people faster, don't they?" "Fear is the key ingredient," Sam admitted. "The station feeds on resistance, on the struggle between following rules and breaking them. My warnings create that tension. I'm not trying to save anyone, Marcus. I'm part of the trap." The handbook in my pocket grew heavier. I pulled it out and watched new pages materialize, the text writing itself in real time. Rule 14 appeared in handwriting I recognized as my own. Marcus Chen must complete the cycle. "My name was already in here," I said, showing Sam the page through the glass, "before I arrived, before I signed anything. The station's been waiting for you specifically. Your bloodline has a debt to pay." Eddie's shadow detached itself from the pump area and glided toward the building. It moved like liquid darkness flowing across the pavement until it reached the window where Sam stood. The shadow pressed against the glass, and when it spoke, it was in Eddie's voice. "Your father signed the same contract in 1995, the shadow whispered. "Debt passes through bloodlines, Marcus. The station's been waiting 29 years for you to come home." "My father abandoned us," I said. "He left when I was 7. He left to delay your calling." Eddie's shadow replied. "Every year he stayed away was another year you got to live normally. But the debt always comes due." The woman in blue moved closer to me, her bundle shifting in her arms. "Look again," she said, holding up the mirror. This time I saw something different in the reflection. Not just my face aging and dying and being reborn, but my father's face too. And behind his, another man who looked like both of us. And behind him, another. A chain of faces stretching back through generations, all of them trapped in the same endless cycle. "Every bloodline that makes a deal with the station becomes part of its foundation," she explained. "Your ancestor made the first contract in 1892. He was traveling with his wife and child when they stopped here. When the baby disappeared, he offered his family's eternal service in exchange for the child's return. But the baby never came back. The baby became the station, the crying, the searching, The endless need, that's what powers this place. And every generation of your family has fed that hunger. I looked at the mirror again. In the reflection, I saw myself signing the contract with blood. But behind me stood my father, and behind him his father, and behind him another man I'd never seen but somehow recognized. All of us signing the same contract, all of us bound to the same fate. How many of us have worked here? Every generation sends one, she said. Your great-great-grandfather in 1892, your great-grandfather in 1923, your grandfather in 1954, your father in 1995, and now you. The crying from the back office grew louder, more desperate. But now I could hear the layers in it, not just one infant's voice, but dozens. Generations of children who'd been lost to feed the station's hunger. The cycle has to be completed, the woman in blue said. That's why you're here. That's why you signed the contract. Not because you needed the job, but because the debt demanded payment. Eddie's shadow pressed harder against the window. Your father tried to break the cycle by staying away, but the station just waited. It knew you'd come eventually. I thought about the GPS dying, about the handwritten directions that had led me here, about how perfectly everything had aligned to bring me to this place at this time. I never had a choice, did I? There's always a choice, Sam said through the glass. But some choices have consequences that stretch across generations. The handbook grew heavier in my hands. New rules were writing themselves faster now, filling page after page with instructions I'd never be able to follow. Rule 17. The Chen bloodline serves until the debt is paid. Rule 18. Payment requires willing sacrifice. Rule 19. The cycle completes at dawn. Outside, the empty sedan's engine finally stopped running. The silence that followed was absolute, like the desert itself was holding its breath. The woman in blue looked at me with something that might have been pity. The sun rises in 43 minutes, she said. That's when you'll understand what your father really sacrificed to give you 29 years of freedom. In the mirror, my reflection stopped, aging and dying. Instead, it showed me standing behind this same register, but older. Much older. And behind me stood a young man who looked exactly like me, signing a contract with blood while I watched with the same expression of resigned understanding that Sam wore now. The cycle wasn't ending with me. It was just beginning. I stared at my reflection in the dark window behind the register. 3 seconds. That's how long it took for my image to catch up with my movements now. When I raised my hand, my reflection waited, then slowly lifted its arm like it was moving through thick water. The lag had been getting worse all night, but this was different. This was Eddie Vasquez territory. I pulled out my phone and turned on the camera, switching it to selfie mode. In the screen, my reflection moved normally, but when I looked at the actual window, the delay was still there. The station was separating me from myself, piece by piece. Time to go, I said to the empty store. The woman in blue had vanished along with her bundle. Sam was gone from outside. Even the crying from the back office had stopped. The only sound was the hum of fluorescent lights and the distant rumble of my Honda's engine in the parking lot. I grabbed my keys and headed for the door. The handbook fell from my pocket, hitting the floor with a sound like breaking glass. When I bent to pick it up, I saw my shadow on the linoleum. The edges were peeling. Just like Eddie's in the security footage, my shadow was coming apart at the borders, fraying like old fabric. Dark wisps curled away from my outline, dissolving into nothing before they hit the ground. I left the handbook where it fell and ran for the door. The Honda started on the first try, which should have been reassuring. Instead, it felt like the station was letting me go, which meant it didn't need to keep me anymore. I'd already served my purpose. I drove east toward the sunrise, watching the gas station shrink in my rearview mirror until it was just another speck in the desert. The GPS on my phone came back to life, showing a clear route to Barstow, then the interstate home. But 20 miles down the highway, I saw something that made me pull over. Another gas station. Same layout, same design, same blue and white color scheme. A young woman stood behind the register, visible through the front window. She had shoulder-length dark hair and wore a blue polo shirt that looked exactly like the uniform I'd been given. I parked and walked to the window. The woman looked up from whatever she was reading and waved. Her name tag said Jennifer. She was maybe 22, with the kind of optimistic smile that said she still believed hard work and good intentions could solve any problem. The same smile I'd probably worn 12 hours ago. I got back in my car and kept driving. In Barstow, I stopped for coffee at a truck stop. While I was paying, I glanced through the window at the gas station across the street. Different company, different colors, but the same basic layout. And behind the register stood the same young woman. Same hair, same uniform, same name tag, Jennifer. I drove to Bakersfield. Different station, same woman. Fresno, same thing. By the time I reached the outskirts of Los Angeles, I'd seen her in 6 different locations, always behind the register, always alone, always wearing that hopeful smile. Geography didn't matter once the station had you. My phone rang as I merged onto the 405. Unknown number. Hello? Marcus? The voice was young, female, scared. Is this Marcus Chen? I'd never heard this voice before, but somehow I knew who it was. Jennifer. How do you know my name? I didn't tell you my name. She was crying now. Marcus, something's wrong with my handbook. Your name just appeared as Rule 15. Never trust Marcus Chen's warnings. What does that mean? What did I do wrong on my first shift? I opened my mouth to answer, but the voice that came out wasn't mine. It was deeper, older, carrying the weight of decades I hadn't lived yet. Fighting only makes it worse, my voice said while I sat there listening to myself speak. The station feeds on resistance. You should accept your role before it gets chosen for you. Marcus? Marcus, are you there? Jennifer's voice was getting more frantic. Please, I need help. I don't understand what's happening. I tried to speak, to tell her I was sorry that I didn't know how to help. But my mouth wouldn't move. The voice that wasn't mine continued talking. Every employee serves their purpose. Your purpose is to maintain the cycle until your replacement arrives. Stop fighting and it won't hurt as much. The line went dead. I pulled over at the next exit and sat in a McDonald's parking lot, staring at my phone. When I tried to call Jennifer back, the number went straight to a recording. The number you have dialed is not in service. I rolled up my sleeves to splash cold water on my face from a bottle in my cup holder. That's when I saw it. Rule 16 was burned into my left forearm like a fresh brand, the letters raised in red against my skin. The Chen bloodline owes eternal service. The pain hit a second later, sharp and burning. I pressed the cold water bottle against the mark, but it didn't help. The words were part of me now, written in scar tissue that would never fade. I understood why my father had left. Not because he was selfish or irresponsible, but because he'd known this day would come. He'd known that eventually, the debt would demand payment, and he'd tried to give me as many normal years as possible before the station called me home. Every photo of him in our house had slowly faded over the years until his face was completely blank. I'd thought it was some kind of chemical reaction in the old film. Now I knew better. The station had been erasing him, preparing for the day when I'd take his place. I turned the car around. The drive back to the desert station took 3 hours, but it felt like minutes. The sun was high overhead when I pulled into the parking lot, casting everything in harsh, unforgiving light. The building looked smaller in daylight, more ordinary, like any other roadside stop. But behind it, partially hidden by a cluster of Joshua trees, sat a 1995 Toyota Corolla. The paint was faded and the body was rusted, but the engine was running. I walked over and peered through the driver's side window. On the seat was a folded piece of paper with my name written on the outside in handwriting I recognized from old birthday cards and school permission slips. The note was brief. "Marcus, I took your place for 30 years. Now you must take mine. The debt passes through bloodlines. Every generation serves until the next comes of age. I'm sorry I couldn't break the cycle, but I gave you as much time as I could. Take care of your mother and sister. Tell them I never stopped loving them. Dad." I folded the note and put it in my pocket next to the handbook that had somehow followed me back here. The front door of the station chimed as I entered. Mr. Holloway stood behind the register, wearing the same crisp white shirt and black tie he'd worn the night before. But in daylight, I could see details I'd missed in the fluorescent gloom. His skin had a waxy quality, like it had been molded rather than grown. His eyes were too bright, too focused, like a predator watching prey. "Welcome back, Marcus," he said. "I was wondering when you'd return. Where's my father? He completed his service this morning when you signed the contract. 30 years of faithful work, just as agreed." Holloway pulled out a manila folder and set it on the counter. "Now it's your turn." Inside the folder was a new contract, identical to the one I'd signed the night before except for the dates. This one was open-ended, with no termination clause. "How long?" I asked. "Until your child comes of age, assuming you have one. If not, the service is permanent." Holloway produced the same fountain pen from his jacket pocket. "Your father managed to delay your calling by staying away, but every bloodline has to pay its debt, eventually. I thought about my mother, about Emma, about the medical bills that had driven me here in the first place. What happens to them? They'll be provided for. The station takes care of its employees' families. Your mother's cancer treatment will be covered, your sister's education funded. All you have to do is sign. And if I don't?" Holloway's smile never wavered. "Then they suffer the consequences of your family's broken promises. The debt will be collected one way or another, Marcus. The only question is whether you pay it willingly or whether it's taken by force." I picked up the pen. It was warm to the touch, like it had been sitting in sunlight. And when I gripped it, I felt the same sharp prick I'd experienced the night before. My blood welled up from the tiny cut, ready to seal another generation's fate. "This started with Mary Hutchinson, didn't it?" I said. "In 1892. Mary made the first deal, yes. She offered her family's eternal service in exchange for her lost child's return. But the child had already become something else by then. The hunger that powers this place. The need that draws employees here. Every person who works the night shift becomes part of that search, part of that endless crying you heard. I signed my name in blood. The contract burst into flames the moment the ink dried, but I felt the binding settle into my bones like a weight I'd carry forever. The scar on my arm burned brighter, and new text appeared below it. "Service begins immediately. Your first shift starts tonight," Holloway said, filing the ashes of the contract in a cabinet behind the register. 8 p.m. to 6 a.m., 7 days a week. You'll find your uniform in the back office, along with your updated handbook. What about Jennifer? She'll serve until her replacement arrives. Could be days, could be decades. Time moves differently for each employee. He handed me a set of keys. These open everything you'll need access to. The rest you'll learn as you go. I walked toward the back office, past the aisles of overpriced snacks and motor oil, past the security monitors that showed empty pumps and endless desert. The door at the end of the hallway stood open, revealing a small room with a desk, a filing cabinet, and a closet full of blue polo shirts in my size. On the desk was a new handbook, this one bound in black leather instead of the cheap paperback I'd carried the night before. I opened it to the first page. "Welcome to your eternal employment, Marcus Chen. Your father's service has ended. Yours has begun." The rules that followed were different from the ones I'd memorized. These were personal, specific to my bloodline and my role in the station's operation. Rule 1. Maintain the cycle until your replacement arrives. Rule 2. Every employee must believe they have a choice. Rule 3. The debt passes to the next generation. I closed the handbook and looked at my reflection in the dark computer screen. The lag was gone. My image moved in perfect synchronization with my body. But something else had changed. My eyes were brighter now, more focused, like Holloway's, like a predator watching prey. Outside, a car pulled up to pump 3. A young man climbed out, maybe 19 or 20, with the desperate look of someone who needed money fast. He walked toward the building with the same determined stride I'd used 12 hours ago. I straightened my new uniform and walked back to the register. The cycle was beginning again, and I had a job to do. The station had to eat, and I was the one who fed it.